So today I'm going to change the power steering pump on my '88 Dodge Dakota. It's this thing right down here. It's been spewing power steering fluid everywhere. In order to remove this thing, you have to take off the wheel, which is on the front right here. And in order to do that, you have to take off the fan shroud, the fan blade, and possibly the radiator. But for now, we're going to loosen up the power steering pump by removing 3 bolts on this thing. There's one right here you choose for tensioning. There's one on the bottom. Let me see if I can get under there and look for you. That's right here. And then there's one that's on the back. And that usually doesn't need to be taken off since this bolt goes all the way through. But I'll get back to you once I get this fan shroud off. And to get this off, there's 2 clips on the top. One right here and one right here that you can get out with a flat blade or a pair of vice grips. And then there's 2 screws. There's one right here, and it looks sort of like this. It's an 8mm. And there's one over here around the same spot, a little bit harder to get to. I'll be back to you in a minute. Okay, now we have the fan shroud loose. And in order to get this thing out of here, we have to take the actual fan out. And in order to do this on the fan that's driven off the water pump, there's 4 bolts down right here. And in order to get these, you'll have to use 2 wrenches. One to hold another bolt and one to loosen each one of the bolts. Or else you'll just end up spinning the engine over and over and over again. I'll get back to you once I get that fan off of there. Okay, so I got the fan and the shroud out of the way. There's the shroud, there's the fan. I forgot to tell you the 4 bolts in here are 13mm. And when you pull those out, your pulley wheel comes off too, so you gotta be careful it doesn't smash into your radiator. Okay, so now that we have everything out of the way, we should be able to get our pulley puller out. You can get these from AutoZone or Riley's, and they're used to pull off the power steering pulley. If you're unfortunate enough like me to have a bracket before the power steering pump and also one behind it to where you can't pull the whole unit out in one piece, well, I will get to pulling this pulley off, and I will be back with you once I get this stupid thing out. Okay, so I got the wheel puller on here, and the way it works is there's 2 little half circle clamps inside of this ring that grip on the front of the wheel, and then you have this bolt that you slowly turn, and then it pushes it off the housing. And to do that, you need, again, 2 wrenches. In this case, I'm using vice grips. And for the turning part, I'm using a big freaking crescent wrench. And basically how you do it, I won't be able to show you because I'm holding the camera, is you hold the vice grips with one hand and you turn the end with the other hand until the wheel finally pops off. If this radiator wasn't in the way, you could do it the faster way by using a power drill. But unfortunately, I don't want to drain the engine coolant out just to get this thing off. I'll be back with you once I get this wheel off. Here's the power steering pump with the wheel removed, and I'm glad I had that bucket down there because this thing went flying off of there once it finally let loose. And you can kind of see how the little thing goes on here if I can get it to come loose. There we go. See the little ring the little two parts that go on there, like so. And you just crank it until the thing pops off. And it comes apart like so. Put this back in here. And here's the nasty wheel. You can see it's quite covered in old power steering gunk. I'm going to have to clean that off pretty good. And if you look real closely, you can see at the shaft where it's been spraying out power steering fluid. That's where the leak was on this. Seems to be a pretty common point of failure, is the shaft wearing out and it coming out there. Usually doesn't start leaking much other places, so it's not too hard to diagnose. Well, now that I got that off, I'm going to have to loosen this bracket way in the back right here. And we can't see it that well, because if I take this front bracket off, I'll also have to take my smog pump off, and I'll have to drain the engine coolant, since it also acts as a seal right here for the engine coolant. What a lovely design. Well, I'll get back to you once I get this rear bracket off and this power steering pump out. Okay, so I got the power steering pump loose. It's just sitting there right now on a couple of hoses. And to loosen this back bracket up here, there's one bolt here. Let me go under so you can get a better view of it. And there's another bolt right there. And it's easier to access them from under here because you have a little bit more working room. But you just loosen those bolts up. You don't have to take the bracket completely off. And you should be able to slide this little stud right here far forward enough to get it to come out. And then once you get this thing out, you have one hose clamp on the top right here that a pair of vice grips will get. And I don't know if you can see it too well, but then there's a lock nut down there that you can use a crescent wrench or a box end on to get it off. But when you get those off, just have a bucket or something prepared, because you're going to start leaking power steering fluid all over the place. Make sure you keep the cap on tight if you haven't drained it, because if it flips over, you're going to have power steering fluid all over the place. And that stuff loves to destroy rubber seals. If you've probably already seen down there, it's messed up my rack and pinion bushings, and then it's done some damage up here and a little more over there, and I'll have to clean that up after I put a new engine in this thing, and that's another project. Well, I'll get back to you once I get this power steering pump out of here. Okay, finally managed to get this power steering pump out of here with a bit of convincing. I use my hammer to beat off of that stupid lock nut that's on the bottom down here. Can't really see it, but it's right here. It's this little thing. You gotta get them on real tight, because there's a lot of pressure in that power steering system. But anyway, here is the pump, and you can see it looks kind of nasty with power steering fluid all over it. And you can kind of see the wear. Maybe you can hear that little bit of play in the shaft. And draining all the power steering fluid out of it. Did make quite a bit of a mess down there, despite having that bucket, because it didn't catch everything. Well, now I'm going to clean off these nasty brackets with some engine degreaser to get it nice and clean to put the new power steering pump back on. I'll be back after I get this all cleaned up. Okay, finally got those brackets nice and cleaned up. And then I discovered on my new power steering pump, it didn't have the studs on it. So I had to grab the old ones off of my old housing and stick them in here. And boy, was that a doozy to get them off. You have to use an impact gun, because these heads are so stinking tiny you can't really get them with the box end. I ended up breaking your knuckle on something. But when you put them back into the new housing, don't use oil, don't use thread locker. If you have to put them in with some power steering fluid, because these are also seals for the housing, and if you get anything in there besides power steering fluid, you can end up with an expensive problem. Well, I'm going to start putting this back inside my truck, and hopefully it won't be too much longer before I can start driving down the road again. I will update you on the progress once I get this thing back in there. Okay, now I have the power steering pump back on with most of the brackets tightened, and we're getting ready to put the pulley back on. In order to do that, you have this different tool that comes in the kit, which is basically a really long bolt. You thread it into the center of the shaft on the power steering pump, down as far as you can get it. And then after you do that, again, you start rotating this nut, and then it pushes it back on. You want to be careful that you get this wheel on straight so you don't end up breaking something. And again, don't use oil, don't use thread locker, don't use anything except power steering fluid on this thing, because again, if it gets in your system, you're going to be paying lots of expensive repair bills. So I'll be back once I get this wheel on here, and hopefully I can start wrapping things up. Well, here it is all back together. Fan shroud, need to put the radiator hose clamp back on. Need to fill the reservoir up, but it's on there nice and snug. And make sure you have all these studs in the back and the bolts on the front nice and tight, because again, those are power steering seals and they'll leak everywhere if you don't get them right. But that's about it. Got the front wheel on. That was a real pain to get it on there, because you had to turn it about 500 times to get the stupid wheel to go on all the way. Just make sure you don't hit your radiator, because I did that a couple of times. You have to use a screwdriver to straighten the blades out. But that's it. Thanks for watching.